So quick intro. Next video may fully include my voice, as I need to at least try it out and get some feedback. I don't expect it to be perfect, but we'll see. Let's get right into this story.
My daughter's boyfriend taunted me to my face after beating her. He didn't know what kind of father he was dealing with. My daughter Bria is 24 years old, and she is the best thing I have ever been a part of making. She graduated college with honors and got a good job in accounting at a mid-sized firm. She had her own apartment and her own car, and she was building a life that made me and her mother proud every single day. Then she started dating this guy named Knox. Knox was fine at first, polite when he came to dinner, shook my hand, told my wife Pauline her cooking was amazing. He brought Bria flowers on their first few dates. I thought he was decent. I was wrong. The first sign was when Bria stopped coming to Sunday dinners. She said she was busy, and then she stopped answering calls right away and would text back hours later saying, "Sorry, I was napping." My wife noticed before I did. She said something is off with Bria. I told her she was probably just settling into the relationship and needed space. Then one afternoon, Bria showed up at our house wearing a long sleeve shirt in the middle of July. Pauline asked her about it, and Bria said she was cold. Nobody is cold in July. When she reached for a glass of water, her sleeve pulled up, and I saw a bruise that wrapped around her forearm like someone had grabbed her and squeezed. I didn't say anything in front of her. I waited until she left, and then I sat in my truck in the driveway for about 20 minutes trying to calm down. Pauline came outside and said we need to be smart about this. She was right. If I went in hot, Bria would shut down and defend him the way people do when they're in that situation. So we made a plan. Pauline started inviting Bria over more. Just casual stuff, coffee in the morning, lunch on her day off. She rebuilt the closeness that Knox had been cutting away. She didn't push. She just made sure Bria knew the door was always open. After about 3 weeks of this, Bria broke down and told her mother everything. Knox had been hurting her for months. It started with grabbing and pushing, and then it got worse. He told her nobody would believe her because he was well liked at his job and had a clean background. He told her that her parents would be disappointed in her for picking someone like him, so she better not say anything. He used our love for her as a weapon to keep her quiet. He told her we would blame her. He told her we would be ashamed. That part made my blood boil more than anything else because he took the safest thing in her life and turned it into a reason to stay silent. I drove to Knox's apartment on a Thursday evening. Bria was at our house with Pauline. I knocked on his door, and he opened it and smiled at me. I told him I knew what he was doing to my daughter and that it was over. He leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms and said, "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." I told him I saw the bruises. He said Bria is clumsy and that she bruises easily. I told him she told her mother everything. He shrugged and said she's emotional and she exaggerates. Then he looked me right in the eyes and said, "What are you gonna do about it?" He said it like a dare, like he wanted me to swing so he could call the cops on me. He said, "You're an old man standing on my porch and your daughter is a grown woman who chose to be with me." He said if she wanted to leave, she would have left already. He smiled when he said that, like he was proud of how trapped he had her. Then he told me to go home and said, "Have a good night, sir," like we just had a normal conversation. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "Okay." I turned around and walked back to my truck and drove home. Knox thought he won that exchange. He thought taunting me to my face was the end of it. It wasn't. It was the beginning. The next day, I took the whole day off work. I went to Bria and Knox's apartment while Knox was at his job. I brought my brother Vin and his truck. Bria had her bags ready because Pauline had helped her pack the night before. We moved every single thing she owned out of that apartment in under 2 hours. Her clothes, her books, her dishes, her furniture that she paid for, all of it. We moved her into our guest room. Then I called the leasing office and told them my daughter was moving out and asked what needed to happen. The lease was in both names, but the leasing agent told me Bria could petition to be removed with proper documentation of her situation. We started that process the same day. Knox came home to a half-empty apartment and called Bria. She didn't answer. He called Pauline. She didn't answer. He called me. I picked up. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "My daughter is home." He said, "She can't just leave." I said, "She just did." He said, "I'll come get her." I told him, "Go ahead." He doesn't know what awaits him. And he did come. About 2 hours later, I heard a car pull up hard in front of the house. The engine was still running when Knox got out and walked up the driveway like he owned the place. I was already on the porch. My brother Vin was sitting on the steps drinking a coffee like it was any other evening. Knox stopped about 10 feet from the porch and said, "Tell Bria to come outside." I said no. He said she has stuff that belongs to me. I said everything in that apartment that belongs to her is already here. If you left something of yours in her things, you can list it and we'll mail it. He didn't like that. He took another step forward and Vin stood up. Vin is 6'4" and 240 pounds and he didn't say a word. He just stood. Knox looked at him and then looked at me and said, "This isn't right." I said, "What you did to my daughter for 8 months isn't right. This is just the correction." He stood there breathing through his nose and I could see him calculating. He wanted to make a scene, but there were 2 of us and the neighbor across the street was watering his lawn, watching the whole thing. Knox pointed at me and said, "You're going to regret this." I said, "I've been regretting not seeing it sooner. That's about the only thing I regret." He got back in his car and sat there for a minute. Then he drove off. Bria was watching from the upstairs window. I saw saw the curtain move. I didn't go up. I just stayed on the porch with Vin and let the quiet settle. See, what Knox didn't understand about me is that I'm not the kind of man who acts out of rage. I'm the kind who plans. I spent 26 years working as a project coordinator for a commercial construction company. My entire career is about timelines and sequencing and making sure every piece is in the right place before you lay the first brick. Knox thought because I walked away from his porch that I was weak. He confused patience with surrender. That's the mistake people like him always make. They think silence means you've got nothing. Sometimes silence means you've got everything, and you're just waiting for the right moment to use it. The night after Knox came to the house, Bria sat at the kitchen table and cried for 2 hours straight. Not loud, dramatic crying, but the quiet kind that comes from somewhere deep. The kind that sounds like relief and grief at the same time. Pauline held her, and I sat across from them and let her get it all out. When she was ready, she told us things that made me leave the room twice because I didn't want her to see what was happening to my face. She told us about the time he threw a plate at the wall next to her head because dinner was cold. She told us about the time he locked her in the bathroom for 3 hours because she liked another man's photo on social media. She told us he once squeezed her wrist so hard she heard something click, and then he told her she was being dramatic when she said it hurt for a week. She told us about the time he took her car keys and hid them so she couldn't leave the apartment for an entire weekend. He told her he was teaching her to appreciate being home. She told us about the names he called her, things I won't repeat because my daughter's name should never be in the same sentence as those words. She told us he controlled what she wore and would make her change if he thought her outfit would attract attention. She told us he checked her phone every night before bed and deleted contacts he didn't approve of. She told us he said if she ever left, he would make sure no one in her life would believe her. He said he would tell everyone she was unstable. He said he would call her job and tell them she had mental health issues. He said he would destroy her the way she was trying to destroy him by leaving. That's what Knox did. He didn't just hit her, he built a cage around her mind and made her think the door was locked from the outside, when really he had just convinced her she didn't deserve to walk through it. The next morning, I woke up at 5 and started making calls. First call was to my buddy Reggie, who's been practicing law for 22 years. I told him everything. He said the first thing Bria needs to do is file a police report. Even if nothing comes of it right away, it creates a paper trail. He said paper trails are what win these things in the long run. He said Knox sounds like the type who's done this before, and if he has, then Bria's report won't be the only one. Second call was to the leasing office again. I spoke to the property manager this time and explained the situation in full. She was a woman in her 50s named Joanne, and when I told her what happened, her voice changed. She said she would personally expedite Bria's removal from the lease and that she would document everything on her end. She also told me something I wasn't expecting. She said Knox had a noise complaint filed against him 4 months ago by the downstairs neighbor. The neighbor reported yelling and what sounded like things being thrown. The complaint was filed and Knox talked his way out of it. Told the office it was just a heated argument and that everything was fine. Joanne said at the time she believed him. Now she didn't. Third call was to my cousin Angela, who works in the county clerk's office. I asked her how to go about getting a protective order. She walked me through the whole process step by step. She said with Bria's testimony and the bruise photos, we had a strong case. I hadn't mentioned the photos yet because I need to explain that part. The day Bria broke down and told Pauline everything, my wife did something I didn't even know about until later. She asked Bria if she could take pictures of every bruise, every mark, every scratch on her body. Bria said yes. Pauline photographed everything. Arms, legs, ribs, back of the neck. She used her phone and she also used our old digital camera that timestamps the images automatically. She saved them in 3 places: her phone, my phone, and a USB drive that she put in our fireproof safe in the closet. My wife is the smartest person I've ever met, and she did all of that without me having to say a word. By Friday, we had a police report filed. The officer who took Bria's statement was a woman named Lieutenant Ford, and she was thorough and kind, and she told Bria she did the right thing. She also told us that Knox's name had come up once before in their system. Not a conviction, but a report from about 3 years ago filed by a different woman in a neighboring county. The report was withdrawn before it went anywhere. Bria looked at me when she heard that, and I saw something shift in her eyes. She realized she wasn't the first. She realized Knox had done this before and would do it again to someone else if nobody stopped him. That was the moment my daughter stopped being scared and started being angry. And an angry woman with evidence is the most dangerous thing a man like Knox will ever face. While we were building the case, Knox was doing what men like him always do. He started trying to control the story. He called 2 of Bria's friends from college and told them that Bria had a mental breakdown and that he was worried about her. He said she was making up stories because she couldn't handle the breakup. He said he was reaching out because he cared. One of those friends believed him. The other one called Bria immediately and told her everything he said. Her name was Tamara, and she told Bria she never liked Knox and that she noticed Bria had been withdrawing for months. She said she was sorry she didn't say something sooner. Then Knox called Bria's direct line at work. He didn't threaten her. He just said he hoped she was doing okay and that he missed her voice. That's the kind of thing that sounds innocent if you read it on paper. But Bria told me that hearing his voice at her desk made her hands shake so hard she couldn't type for 20 minutes. She told her supervisor what was happening, and her supervisor said, "Take whatever time you need," and gave her the number for the company's employee assistance program. That call to her workplace was a mistake on Knox's part because it gave us another document documented point of contact to include in the protective order filing. The protective order was granted the following Wednesday. A judge reviewed the photos, the police report, and Bria's written statement and granted a temporary order of protection on the spot. Knox was served at his workplace. A uniformed officer walked into his office in the middle of the day and handed him the papers in front of his coworker. I know this because Reggie made sure the service was done during business hours. He said it was standard procedure. I didn't ask questions. Knox called me that night from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up because I wanted to hear what he had to say. He was breathing hard and talking fast. He said I was ruining his life. He said his boss pulled him into a meeting after the officer left and asked him what was going on. He said his coworkers were looking at him differently. He said this was going to follow him. I said, good. He said Bria was lying and that she was doing this because she was bitter about the breakup. I said there are photographs. Knox, timestamp. He went quiet for the first time since I had known him. Then he said, what do you want? I said, I want you to never contact my daughter again. I want you to never drive past our house. I want you to never show up at her job. I want you to disappear from her life completely and permanently. He said, or what? I said, or the criminal case moves forward and Reggie has already been in contact with the other woman who filed a report 3 years ago and she's now willing to testify. That part was true. Reggie had tracked her down through public record. Her name was Denise and she had been 21 when Knox did the same thing to her. She was 24 now, and when Reggie called her and told her another woman had come forward, she broke down on the phone and said she had been waiting for this. She said she withdrew her report because Knox threatened to go after her family. She said she never stopped being afraid of him. She said she would testify and that she would do it gladly. She told Reggie things that were almost identical to what Bria described. The grabbing, the isolation, the phone checking, the threats about what would happen if she left. Knox had a script and he had been running it on women for years. The only difference was that Denise didn't have a father who showed up on a porch. Knox didn't say anything for about 10 seconds after I told him about Denise. Then he said, this isn't over. I said, actually, Knox, it is. You just don't know it yet. 2 weeks later, Knox violated the protective order. He showed up at Bria's job during her lunch break and waited in the parking lot. He didn't approach her directly. He just sat in his car where she could see him and stared. He parked in the row directly facing the office windows. He wanted her to know he was there. That's the thing about men like Knox. Even when they're told to stay away, they can't let go of the control. Sitting in that parking lot wasn't about wanting her back. It was about reminding her that he could still reach her. Bria called me shaking, and I told her to go inside and tell her manager and then call the police. She did both. Her coworker walked her away from the window and sat with her until the officers arrived. The security camera in the parking lot caught everything. Knox sitting there for 37 minutes, not getting out of the car, not leaving, just watching. The police picked him up that evening at his apartment. He was charged with violating the order of protection, which in our state is a criminal offense. He posted bail, but now he had a second incident on his record, tied directly to Bria's case. Reggie filed a motion to upgrade the temporary order to a permanent one and submitted the security footage as evidence along with the record of him calling Bria's workplace. The judge didn't even hesitate. Knox now had a permanent restraining order against him and a pending criminal charge. His lawyer tried to negotiate. He said Knox would agree to no contact if the charges were dropped. The prosecutor said no. She said the pattern of behavior was too clear and that the prior report from Denise was being factored into the case. Knox's attorney called Reggie and asked if there was any way to make this go away quietly. Reggie said there's nothing quiet about what your client did. Knox ended up taking a plea deal. He pled guilty to misdemeanor assault and violation of a protective order. He got 18 months of probation, mandatory anger management classes, and a permanent mark on his record that would show up on every background check for the rest of his life. The judge told him during sentencing that if he violated any of the terms, he would serve the full suspended sentence of 2 years. She also told him that the court had reviewed the prior report from Denise, and that while it couldn't be used for additional charges, it painted a clear picture of who he was. Knox stood there in his suit, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His shoulders were rounded and his hands were shaking, and he kept his eyes on the floor the entire time. This was not the same man who leaned against his doorframe and asked me what I was going to do about it. This was a man who finally understood that the old man on his porch had done something about it every single day for the last 6 months without raising his voice once. After the sentencing, Bria and I walked out of the courthouse together. She didn't say anything for a while. We got in the truck and she sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead. Then she said, "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." I said, "You don't ever apologize for that. He made you believe you couldn't. That's not your fault." She said, "I kept thinking you would be disappointed in me." I pulled over to the side of the road because I couldn't drive and hear that at the same time. I looked at her and I said, "Bria, you could never disappoint me. Not ever. Not for this, not for anything. You are the bravest person I know because you got out. Do you understand that? A lot of people don't get out. You did." She cried and I let her, and then we drove home and Pauline had dinner waiting like she always does. Roast chicken and mashed potatoes, because that has been Bria's favorite since she was 6 years old. And Pauline knew exactly what her daughter needed that night without anyone having to say it. 2 months after the sentencing, Bria moved into a new apartment, different part of town, new neighborhood. She picked it herself and she signed the lease with just her name on it. I helped her move in. Vin came with his truck again. Pauline organized the kitchen because she said Bria would put the plates in the wrong cabinet otherwise. And she was probably right. On her first night there, Bria called me and said the apartment was quiet. I asked if that scared her. She said no. She said it was the first time in a long time that quiet felt safe. That was 6 months ago. Bria is back at Sunday dinners now. She got a raise at work. She adopted a cat she named Birdie, who is the most spoiled animal I have ever seen. She started running in the mornings, and she joined a book club with some women from her office. She is rebuilding the life that Knox tried to dismantle, and she is doing it on her own terms, at her own pace, and with people around her who actually love her. Knox moved out of the county about 4 months ago. I know because Reggie keeps tab. He's 3 towns over working a different job at a different company that doesn't know his history yet. His probation officer checks in monthly. Denise ended up filing her own formal report with the help of a victim's advocate that Reggie connected her with. It won't lead to charges because of the statute of limitation, but it's on record now. If Knox ever does this to another woman, there will be 3 names waiting in the system, not 2. 3. Tamara told Bria recently that the college friend who believed Knox's story reached out to apologize. She said Knox had been so convincing on the phone that she genuinely thought Bria had lost it. Now she felt sick about it. Bria told her it was fine. She said Knox's whole thing was being convincing and that nobody should feel stupid for falling for it because she fell for it too. That might be the thing I'm most proud of. Not the legal case, not the protective order, not watching Knox shrink in that courtroom. The thing I'm most proud of is that my daughter came out of this without bitterness. She came out with clarity. Sometimes I think about that night on his porch, the way he smiled at me, the way he said, "What are you going to do about it?" like I was nothing, like I was just some father who would yell and threaten and then go home and do nothing. He didn't know I was the kind of father who would take a breath and then take apart every single pillar holding his life up one by one until there was nothing left for him to lean against. Not his apartment, not his reputation, not his freedom, not his confidence. He asked me what I was going to do about it. Everything. I did everything.